And away we go. Ben Horton, back in the house. It has been too long since I've seen you last, my friend.
COVID put a damper on a lot of things.
It did, including our friendship.
Yeah. But every time you have me on, makes me feel like I'm still doing cool stuff, so that's a win.
Yeah, I love stroking your ego. That's really my point in coming here today. Just in any sense that you felt like the adventure you once were was slipping away from you can now be reinstated.
Thank you, because that's actually something that I think every adventurer feels when they've gone like a month without doing something cool.
Yeah, I'm nothing. I'm nothing.
This is the rest of my life.
Yeah. You have a huge head. My head's the size of an onion. What are you talking about? I need to constantly be reaffirming this.
It's a leaky balloon.
It always, yes. But what have you been up to, man? How have you been spending your time lately?
Well, COVID was kind of a blessing in disguise because it gave me time to really focus on a new passion, which is paragliding. I was just getting into it when we talked before, and it let me get out like every day and just advance really quickly.
Through COVID, you could still do it.
Yeah, because I'd hike up mountains and fly off when we weren't allowed to be with other people. I mean, there was definitely a risk factor of like you can't push it too hard because you don't want to go into a hospital, you don't want to strain the system, things like that. So there was a while there where we really slowed down. But then once things started to get a little bit more free, just go out, hike and fly, or once we got to the point where a couple guys that flew together a lot could get in a car together, that really opened a lot up. And I started doing some more cross-country flights and bigger distances, and now work's popping up again, and I feel like I'm getting rusty. It's not quite like riding a bike. So I've had to pull it back a level.
Getting back into the photography.
Yeah, getting back into the photography stuff. I've been producing some TV stuff, and it's just been kind of like all the things that slowed down during COVID. Now everybody's trying to catch back up on.
Yeah. So what is a cross-country flight?
There's different stages you go through as a paraglider, and in the beginning, it's kind of like you're a fish in a tank. It's like, here's your boundaries. You can stay right here. And then after you progress a little bit, you're kind of like a reef fish, where you're like, oh, I'm going to play around this whole reef, and that's like one mountain. Cross country is I'm going to catch a thermal. I'm going to go up thousands of feet, and then I'm going to glide as far as I can, catch another one, glide as far as I can. It's kind of like being a pelagic species where you're making distance. And
you're like a pelican.
Yeah,
and then where do you land? You have someone pick you up, and
it's
kind of like a mountain bike thing where you get driven to the top, and then someone will get you at the bottom.
It's that pelagic species, right? Like you're just kind of going, and what I always tell people with paragliding is like, you're gonna land. Don't worry about not landing.
Yeah, it's not the problem.
You're coming down. Where is the problem?
The velocity and location are the things you need to worry about.
Yeah. So if I'm the biggest flight I've done, I was like 8,000 feet over the ground. So you have a lot of options. I see a field 5 miles that way, I can make it. It's when you're 500 feet, 1,000 feet off the ground. You're like, oh wait, no, I gotta find somewhere here, and it's a neighborhood. Like I landed in a guy's yard a couple months ago.
Holy shit!
Yeah, he came out, helped me pack up my wing.
Was it? I'm guessing that was not the desired or first spot you were hoping to land.
Well, so the spot that I picked originally when I was up higher, turned out to be a shooting range. And people weren't slowing down as I was getting low, so I had to bail out and land in a guy's yard.
So how do you map out that? Like, so you take off and you have a desired location that you think you're going to land in. Mm-hmm. How many miles was that?
My biggest flight, which, compared to my friends is not that big, is a little over 40 miles. And I actually flew to another site, another regular reef fish site where I knew there was a landing zone. But a good paraglider, I can put it anywhere where there's room for my wing, and for me to glide into it, I can put it down there. So we call it spot landing. I can hit a flag on the ground. and I can miss it too. So you got to be on it every time.
Okay. Okay. I mean, it's awesome that you've gotten so into this, because I remember when I met you, I don't know, 4 years ago now, you were just getting into it, and you never really know with someone when they have that neophyte enthusiasm how far they're going to take it. And you and I have gotten amped on a lot of different sports, and I always find that there's this diminishing returns point in a sport where then you need to make the decision, do I want to keep going with this? Because there's going to be a flatter rate of growth in my skills now that I've made it from 0 to 1. And you kind of need to, the problem for people like us is time. It's like, where do you want to invest your time? And what feeling is this sport giving me that's making it worth it to continue to get to this next level and this next level and this next level? Yeah. And it was interesting what you said to me before he started, which is paragliding gives me the feeling that all the other sports that I've done in my life, I've been trying to get.
Yeah. Yeah. I think one of the things I said is it feels like when you're dropping into that big wave, but it feels like that all the time. And back to your point about like the diminishing returns, a lot of the sports that I reached my limit in, I got bored with because I wasn't growing. And to me, the most fun part of any sport is progression. You know, one of the reasons why I decided to try paragliding is because I had been climbing at the same level for 15 years. I'd been surfing at the same level for 15 years. I wanted to suck at something again. I wanted to go out and have big realizations that changed everything for me. And that's what paragliding does, is, you know, you can every day go out and, you know, you're using a thermal to climb and you're looking out at the terrain and you're having to play chess in your mind with Mother Nature, with weather, and say, okay, that field over there is heating up and there's a shadow line right next to it, and the wind is going to blow the hot air from the field to that shadow line, which is going to set the thermal off. It's going to trigger it. So if I fly over there, I might find a climb. And you get there and there's no climb. So do you wait? Do you trust your instincts enough that you just wait there for that thermal to show up? Because it has to build. It comes kind of like in a lava lamp where it bubbles up. And if you wait, and sometimes you're getting lower and lower and lower, and like this could be the end of my flight, and then it shows up. And you get to just make those kinds of decisions throughout the day. And bad decision making can mean a 15-minute flight on an epic day. And good decision making can lead to hours and hours in the air and covering, you know, I have friends that have flown hundreds of miles.
Yeah, that's so crazy that you don't have a motor.
Yeah.
Right? That you can stay up hours in the air without a motor, just finding thermals and then swooping back down, then finding another thermal.
Yeah, I mean, in a sense, it's kind of like sailing, right? Where you're using the wind energy. And if you're sailing a long distance, you're going to fly through different weather patterns. And it's the same thing with paragliding. This valley is working this way. I get to the next valley, everything's changed, right? The wind is now coming from a different direction because that mountain over there is drawing all the air up it. Or there's something called valley winds, which are, you know, going underneath everything. And depending on your altitude and the direction the sun is shining, everything's different. So you have to be able to think both creatively and like super logically at the same time.
Yeah, man, and start to become more literate with the wind as an element must be really interesting, right?
Yeah.
Like you're becoming literate in climbing. You're learning the wall. Surfing, you're obviously learning the water. But to enter into a new sport that is forcing you to become literate in a whole new element must also be very cool.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that really drew me to it in the first place was the weather aspect of it, like figuring out how to look at the data from the National Weather Service and all the different weather models and pick out and say, oh, it's going to be good to fly here today. And this brings up a side point. As that reef fish, when you're flying one site,
what do you mean by reef fish?
I mean, like you're never leaving the reef.
Right.
Like you're staying there. Like your whole world is that little clump of rocks, right? So I was starting to get into more and more detailed weather forecasts. And I just want to preface this that, like, I'm still in my progression. There's way more advanced people to talk to about this. But this is a newer thing for me where, like, I would look at those super detailed weather forecasts and say, oh, it's going to be, 15 miles an hour from the southwest. We're going to be able to climb in the thermals to 7,000 feet. And, I'd have all the details about that site. But now I'm at a point where I'm starting to pull back out. I'm starting to look at, like, the larger flows across the country and, like, where the different weather systems are meeting, because I'm looking at bigger distances. So now I want to know, okay, like, yeah, that site's going to be doing that, but, like, am I going to have a tailwind? Am I going to be able to follow the seam? We call it convergence, where, wind is blowing from the east and the west, and it's going to meet somewhere, and it's got to go somewhere. It's going to go up, right? So how do I follow that seam, and where can it take me to? And sometimes you can just fly in a straight line and just be climbing, flying along for miles.
That is so interesting. So you're looking at where different weather patterns are converging. So you basically leapfrog from system to system.
Yeah.
That's so sick. I mean, one thing it just makes me think of riptides, right? Because like a riptide is energy coming from the ocean, hitting the shore, and not really having anywhere to go.
Yeah.
So it's moving back out and converging.
Can't go down.
And it's just becoming more powerful,
Yeah.
which is why some riptides can look like rivers going back out into the ocean. It's just energy trying to find a place to go.
And that's what we have. And getting to the point where you can play with that is amazing. I was talking to my friend Logan a couple days ago, who is a mentor and, like, 1,000 times better than me, And one of the things I was saying to him is, I keep hearing people talk about paragliding as, like, being super peaceful and relaxing. And I haven't found that yet. Like, I'm still amped, and I'm still, like, really trying to work on things and figure it out. And one of the really interesting things was, I thought he was one of those people, like, no matter how crazy it gets, he's fine. He's like, yeah, when I start to get worried, or when I feel like it's over my skill level, and I stopped and I looked at him like, what? He's like, that's when I get on the radio and I control my voice, and I'm like, hey guys, this is Logan. I'm at 11,000 feet moving southwest. I'm like, oh, okay, so you do get stressed. He's like, yeah.
You just hide it.
He has his system for kind of working around it, and I have mine, which is to pull out my Camelback, drink some water, relax. And sometimes on a scary flight, I'll go through 3 liters.
How do you pee?
This is a great story.
I knew we were going to find some gold.
Yeah. So I wear an external catheter, and then I have a tube that goes out through the harness, and I can just pee out, right? Most of my flights are a couple hours at most, so I just hold it, right? Or if I have to pee, I'll just go land. But a few months ago, on my biggest cross-country flight yet, I'm about halfway. I'm wearing the catheter for the first time. And I kind of had to pee, so I was like, yeah, I'll give this a go. Well, I had cut the tube 6 inches short because I guess I was just doing my math wrong. And I had it sticking out my pant leg so I could just stick a leg over the side and pee. Well, it was below freezing where I was. So I stick my leg out, and I'm like, oh, the tube's still inside my pants. So I have to, like, dig through, and I'm trying not to get the wing to collapse over my head at the same time. I finally pull the tube out, stick my leg over the side. I'm like, all right, let's give this a go. And like I said, it was below freezing. So the glue on the external catheter, which is basically a condom with a tube coming out of it, had stopped working and had slid off. So I'm 7,000 feet up, pissing my pants. and so I'm like, oh, this feels wrong. Like, it's not supposed to feel so warm right here, right? So I pinch it off. But I'm only halfway. And so I flew another, 2 hours holding it.
Oh.
And by the time I was getting to, a landing zone, I had to pee so bad. I was in so much pain. And the bummer is it was an epic day. I could have flown for another 3 hours, right? I could have flown 100 miles that day. The conditions were so good. I was so high. I was moving so fast. So I'm trying to spiral down, which is a descent technique that increases the G-forces to 4 Gs. And I'm like, I can't do that. My bladder's about to burst, So Eventually, I finally hit the ground, run somewhere to take a leak. And I don't know if you've ever experienced this where you have to pee so bad, but that the pressure actually like cinches your bladder off. You can't pee. I'm like, oh no.
Yeah.
Like I don't want to have to go to a hospital and get a real catheter to drain this. Finally, I pee. And I didn't know it, but a buddy of mine had been following me. And so he sees me land, so he comes in and lands too. And he's like, why did we land?
Oh, no. When you gotta go.
I'm like, dude.
You gotta go.
So then I think this is a hilarious story unique to me. And so I posted it on one of our message threads. I'm like, hey guys, pissed my pod today. I told the whole story. And they're like, welcome to the club, man. Everybody's pissed their pod. Like sometimes you just got to let it go.
Yeah. The things you don't think about when you start a sport.
Yeah. And I mean, so cave diving, we use the same technique with external catheter. And there's a little nozzle where you can close it. And I was borrowing a buddy of mine's suit. And I didn't know that he had the little nozzle to close it. I'd never had that on my suit before. So
kept it open.
I tried to pee. I couldn't pee. It was like completely blocked off. So like back pressure,
Oh my God. So wait, you mentioned collapsing your wing.
Yeah.
That sounds scary as fuck, man.
Yeah, I mean it can be. And it's kind of like one of those, I don't know what other sport has something where you can just be like cruising along and then everything goes to hell. But yeah, you can be flying along and then your wing.
I feel like a lot of sports actually.
Yeah, I mean that you can recover from. Like
right.
It's kind of like, imagine you're surfing, you have a wipeout, but you have to get back on your board and start surfing again because it's not going to end until the ground, right? So yeah, like imagine a plane has the right wing just rip off. And what's that going to do? It's going to send the plane into a spin. So you have to be able to manage the paraglider collapsing at any moment, right? It's not actually that terrible of a thing if you know how to do it. But it's also an advantage, right? So like hang gliders, which is the rigid wing, they can fly in much stronger conditions than we can, much higher wind because they're faster. But let's say a hang glider gets hit by an incredible downburst or something out of a cloud. It's going to flip the hang glider and your flight is over. You're throwing your reserve, right? Paraglider, it'll collapse and then reopen. So in some sense, like it's good to have that ability to just like close it and open it.
What's the biggest danger in paragliding?
The ground.
Yeah,
Altitude is your
like
friend.
When I think who's the famous climber who went up with Jimmy Chin in Meru?
Conrad,
and they say, "Why do you climb?" And he says, "The view."
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, so most accidents happen on launch and landing. I mean, maybe somebody's going to run into somebody else in the air, but like the problem is still the ground. So it's being able to reopen your wing. It's, and the more beginner wings reopen themselves. The more advanced you get, you have to do something to fix it. But like my closest calls in paragliding have all been on launch. I got hit by a 30-mile-an-hour gust while launching on a knife edge ridge, and it was by far the scariest thing that's happened to me. And I made it out of it, but it definitely like.
Did you have a long flight after that?
No,
it just went straight back down.
It's a site called Ladyface. It's a convergent site, so you have wind coming from every direction, hitting this mountaintop, and the expert beta on it is you shouldn't even be able to tell which direction the wind is coming from to have a safe flight there. And it was blowing in with 30-mile-an-hour gusts. And in my head, I'm like, 30-mile-an-hour gust equates to like 15 miles an hour of going up if these are thermals. So I'll launch between the gusts, get out over the valley, and I'll just ride that up. Well, good plan, but it just happened to hit right when I was launching. I mistimed the launch, and it was, I was going up at 5 meters a second, and the wing was just collapsing and spinning, and, it's trying to blow me over the back of the mountain, and that's a bad thing.
So how can you time a gust?
I sat there for like 2 hours just feeling the wind, and, I was timing it So I'd have a cycle come in, each cycle lasts about 2 minutes, and then there's about a 4-minute break, and then another 2-minute cycle. So you can tell how fast the ground is heating up, how fast those thermals are kicking off.
Time and set waves.
Yeah, exactly. Except, sometimes there's a set wave after the set.
Yeah. Sometimes it's a 3-wave set, sometimes a 5-wave set.
Exactly.
I gotta say, I think it's so cool that you've taken it upon yourself to get good at this sport, because that feeling of wonder and growth is so transferable. I think that it's people are mistaken when they think that a sport is an island of itself. It transfers into the way you experience reality and problem solve the rest of your life.
Yeah.
And I think that the same goes for when you feel stagnant within a sport. That kind of energy transfers into your work, your relationship. Yeah. I mean, like the old thing of like when the girlfriend's like, he just needs to go surfing to get psyched, and then he'll be a good boyfriend again, right?
If I don't do something at least every week that requires focus and energy and fear and, really putting all of my energy into problem solving, I start to get anxiety. I start to get depressed. I think I've said this to you before, but I have another vial of energy in me that has to be used in that way. And if I don't use it, it turns into stress and anxiety.
Totally. Yeah, I think that a lot of people do. But what's weird is that there's a barrier, in my experience, between knowing that there's a problem and knowing what to do about it. Because when you feel that stress and anxiety, it's not necessarily an energizing feeling, like, sick, okay, I want to go do something right now. It's like, I want to sit on the couch and, just pout.
Yeah.
And it takes forcing yourself to go do the thing, which then creates that kind of upward spiral.
And I've had it happen before. So a long time ago was a professional whitewater kayaker. And I destroyed my shoulders and had surgeries, and it took me like 2 years to really recover to the point where I was like, okay, cool, I'm good to go back out. And it was so hard to get my life back, to get me back, right? And I'd go out and I'd go kayaking, and now I was an expert. I'm running massive waterfalls and creeks, and I just couldn't enjoy the fear anymore. Like, I couldn't make that transition back to having fun with the fear. And that's one of the reasons I got out of kayaking. And it was not fun for me to just go float down a river. With surfing, sometimes people say, like, every day is a good day. I don't have that.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I drive past Rincon pretty often, and I see guys sitting out, and I can't even see waves. And I get, like, it's meditation for them. It's great for them. And I want that, but I don't really have it.
Yeah, it's good to know when to move on from something and just and continue to be able to shelve your ego and start something new. Yeah. Like I really appreciate how much you have taken on the kook for life mentality. I think it's very wise.
It's
very wise, and I think that life is short and people just can get stuck in their thing because they identify with it too much. I think that social media exacerbates that problem because you get this kind of I've thought about this quite a bit recently. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts. It's living life with as many asymmetrical returns as possible. So I think that burnout is largely the cause of putting energy into something and not seeing returns from it. Work is really fun when you're putting in and you're seeing a lot come out of it.
Yeah.
It gets not fun when you just feel like that you're grinding, right? It's like you're grinding something down, you're putting effort in, but nothing is coming out. I think similarly, you can experience that with sports, and I think that there's a kind of seductive mirage with social media where it's a false asymmetric return. Like you can post a photo of yourself doing this thing that you've really stagnated in, and aren't having a good time doing. This dog right here. Anyone who's watching the video of this podcast knows that we have a third guest right now.
Who thinks she's the star.
Oh, yes, you are. Oh, yes, you are. What do you think about asymmetric returns? Oh, yes, you do. You're a dog. Dogs don't care about asymmetric returns.
I really wish that we could be more like dogs where, hey, things are good right now. Yeah. Like, I'm not starving,
I'm enjoying myself because I'm with Ben Horton right now. But I think social media is a false asymmetric return. Mm-hmm. You post something that you've been super stagnant in, get a bunch of likes, and it feels like you're progressing, but it's like it dissolves on your tongue the moment it hits your mouth. So finding the real asymmetric returns that don't necessarily even have sometimes that can include, more people listening to you or bigger visibility, but sometimes that can be a totally internal and often invisible asymmetric return.
And it can give you returns in the wrong place, right? So like I post something that I'm not really that proud of. I don't really enjoy that much. And I get a ton of likes. Oh, maybe I should post more of that, right? Like I love stories with a purpose, I love adventures that are based on something, not just, hey, I climbed this super hard thing, but like, hey, I climbed this so that I could learn more about X, right? I think that the greatest adventures in history all happened in the name of science, right? Like, why did we go to the North Pole? Why did Johann Reinhardt climb Yuyayako, right? And he found the Incan ice mummies up there and advanced our knowledge. So those are the things that I want to spend more time doing, but what gets its likes on social media? Little person, big view, pretty pictures, nothing with really a lot of depth. And sometimes I look through my feed, I'm like, I need to post something that shows that I'm like a photojournalist, that I can shoot at this other level. And then I post it and I get 50 likes. Like, okay, nobody wants to see that. I'll just keep posting guy standing on the beach with a surfboard, And it's changed my career. It's changed almost every photographer I know's career. A few popular photographers popularize a certain style, and then that's what we get asked to do. I think there's also an advantage to that where, I shot fashion since I was 18 years old, right? And for the longest time, the industry was telling us who to pay attention to, what beauty is, et cetera. And now, some people complain about it, and it's kind of shallow, but like people get to choose for themselves what they want to see. And I think that's really shown up in the changes that have happened in that particular industry, who we're seeing.
How do you, I'll ask you a more specific question, because I just think that this is such a powerful tool to finding an internal compass about where you want to spend your time. But do you journal at all?
I don't.
You don't?
I used to, but I kind of think of my pictures as my journal.
Got it. How do you reassess when you know you want to make a life change?
Man, that's so hard. There's so many different factors at play. If I'm not finding joy in it, I just don't put my energy there. I really wanted to focus more on travel and adventure photography, so that's all I put on my website for a while, and that's all the work I started getting. But for me, I get bored when there isn't variety. So, I like to switch it up pretty regularly, and I know that that's not really helped my career. But we're trying to move right now. We both want to get out of LA. We both we both know that it needs to happen, me and my girlfriend Natalie. But it's really hard to make that change. There's a saying that I heard once that has always stuck with me. Change comes when the pain of change is less than the pain you're in. And I'm not saying that I'm in pain sitting here in LA, right? But I know that at this point, like, it's more difficult for me to stay here than it is for me to try to move on.
I've heard the same or similar saying about writing a book, which is only write a book if you have to.
Yeah, and I think you and I are probably very similar people. Like, I'm not a procrastinator. I just need motivation, and sometimes procrastination gives me that.
Yeah, and I think that figuring out when to make those changes and how to knowing when to make the changes.
Yeah.
I sort of lost my train of thought, but yeah.
You know, during COVID, I think we talked about this before, you know, when you just showed up here at the house.
Yeah.
I thought my career was over.
Right.
My TV show got canceled because I'm not allowed in China on an American journalism visa. You know, none of the brands I was working with were shooting. The ones that were my main clients actually got sold, and like new company, new people, you know, my years of work with them were out the door. So I was really getting down to the point where it's like, what is next? How do I transition? How do I take all the work that I put into this career and like step over into another one with it? You know, I was thinking about starting companies that were camera gear. I was thinking about, you know, I could go be a photo editor somewhere. And it was really hard for me because the thing that gives me the most joy in life is the ability to go out and have these adventures. And if I go get a 9-to-5 somewhere, if I start working for somebody else, I don't have the flexibility that I have to actually live my life. And this is my one shot, right? I mean, a lot of people believe a lot of different things, but I believe this is my one shot. And I was getting really depressed, and I was getting chunky, and, you know, like just a lot of things were starting to weigh down on me. And luckily, you know, you were talking earlier about just grinding and nothing coming out. That's what it felt like. It felt like I had a mill, and I had no wheat to put in it. And so I just would sit there and show people that, hey, I can still turn this mill. You just give me the wheat and I'll do it. So I was doing jobs where I was making less than I was spending, and that showed people I was still out there and working and doing things. And now I'm swamped. So
yeah, that was interesting what you said about how photography really slowed down, and you ended up taking a couple jobs where you really weren't making any profit off of it, but it was a spark that got more work going.
Yeah.
And the power of just showing people that you're working.
And there's a big difference between like, yeah, I'll shoot your campaign for free. And, ooh, this isn't really lucrative for me, but it'll get the right eyes on me, right? As a professional, you have to learn the difference between those two things.
Right.
I do a lot of spec shoots, you know, just where I get a model and a location. I'm like, yeah, this will be a rad photo. It'll look very professional, commercial. And, you know, maybe I won't make money on this, but, you know, I know this person's following me on LinkedIn and on Instagram, and like this will show them what I can do. And back to that whole social media thing, like I don't care about Instagram anymore at all. And a lot of the top industry leading photographers that I know don't have a lot of followers. You know, there was a time frame where we would judge somebody's quality by how many followers they had. And I think we're transitioning out of that finally.
Yeah, that's good. I do think that things are starting to come around more. I mean, this is a sample size of like 4, but my like 12-year-old nephews are not that into social media. Mm-hmm. And they're kind of like, nah, that's lame. I wanna go, and they're just rad kids who want to go learn how to build shit. But I was like, thank God, there's hope for the next generation.
Yeah, and I mean, look, I think if you have a kid living in the city somewhere and that's their access to the world, that's how they're going to access the world. But if you have kids living on the North Shore of Oahu or, you know, Costa Rica or next to the National Forest here in the United States, that's where they're going to want to be.
Yeah. You mentioned one shot in life, and it makes me think of the different codes that sort of write our culture and our lives. Like, you know, in other podcasts, you talked about like, growing up in a very religious family, and then moving beyond that and having to find other scripts that inform the way in which you live your life. Have you come to any others that you found to be just incredibly helpful guides for you that doesn't have the dogma attached to it?
I mean, I think that's all already in here. It's all, yeah, I think morality is something that's innate. It's in us. Maybe not like completely instinctual, but to function in a society, you have to have some form of morality, right? But at the same time, I think like I have what's the word I'm looking for? I seriously dislike and turn away from anything traditional. If we're only doing something because of tradition, I have to see how my life functions without that in it. And if it makes my life worse, I bring it back in.
Yeah, tradition is not a great argument.
No.
But that's a very cool point, though, because it's so powerful. And if you don't recognize what's tradition versus what actually has utility beyond just the fact that everyone does it, it's very hard to differentiate what is a smart way to live your life.
Yeah. And, you know, I think things like religion have tried to capitalize or, what's the word I'm looking for? To own morality, but that stuff's already there. You know, you can go look at a pack of dogs and see all of human morality boiled down to its most basic instincts. If you're an asshole, somebody else is going to finally be fed up with you, and they're going to bite you, you know? And, you know, if you are constantly taking from others, they're eventually going to be over it, and they're going to take back from you. And whether that's a pound of flesh or food, it's going to happen. There's no wrong way to learn morality, I think. I mean, I can probably come up with a few. But I think it's better just to learn that it's not because of a consequence at the end. It's because of the happiness and enjoyment and functioning well in the life that you have.
You know, I think that it sort of goes in two directions, where some people will live within tradition and the comfort of that, and they will tend to gravitate towards what other people are doing just because they've found safety and comfort within that. And then there are people who have a combative relationship to it. I very rarely meet, and I think
combative.
you're in the latter group, but I very rarely meet people who are ambivalent to it. It's like you either go left or right, up or down. There's a force and a tension that you need to respond to in one way or another.
I think just the way that I was raised led to me just really having a distaste for somebody coming in and saying, these are the rules. And when you say why, it's because I said so.
Yeah. And for, most people haven't listened to the last podcast, so you did. Can you give just a little bit of background on it? Because I think it informs a lot of the decisions that you've made in your life.
Yeah, I'll give the super short version, which is I was raised Jehovah's Witness. I was an ordained minister. My dad was a scholar for the organization. And then around 18 years old, I started translating the books myself from Greek using something called the Diaglot, which, I didn't necessarily learn Greek, but I learned how to translate it. And I would read those passages in the Bible that doctrine is based on and figure out that it's not saying what I'm being taught it's saying, that words have been changed. There's something called Strong's Exhaustive Concordance of the Bible, and they have removed things and put things in for thousands of years. So once I started realizing that the way I was raised wasn't something that I believed anymore, I was like, well, I've always been taught about this science stuff being kind of, made up and just a way to control people. So I started looking into it and realizing, wow, they've actually done research. They've tested this stuff. Like, it's not the science that I was taught. The science I was taught was a whole different thing. And that just put me on this path to always assuming that my information was incomplete and learning that I can believe something wholeheartedly and it can still be wrong. So I'm going to argue my points with you. It's going to be a discussion, I'm not going to just say, oh, that's how you see it. Okay, I'll see it that way too. But I'm willing to change my perspective on anything.
I think that the mindset that you're operating with incomplete information is such a wise approach. I just read a book called How to Be Perfect. Have you heard of this book?
No.
It's a very funny book. It's written by a guy named Mike Schur, who's a Saturday Night Live comedy writer, and it's a book about philosophy. So he dives into Aristotelian philosophy, Kant, the fat man in the trolley car problem, like all these very deep philosophical questions, and he does it in just really hilarious ways. But I believe it was Kant who was like, his whole thing was do more good than bad, and that you can look at every decision as good or bad. And what the author Mike Schur says is that we're operating with such incomplete information so often that often what we think is the right decision that's doing good is just being made with that incomplete info.
Yeah.
And I think that just walking around with that provides a lot of humility, and certainty is a very dangerous ideal to walk around with.
But also imagine if the whole world had my perspective. It wouldn't be a great place.
Right, everyone would just be like, well, I don't know, maybe it could be.
Because like I describe myself as a nihilist, but I also, even though I don't think it matters, I want to be a good person.
Right.
Right? And if everybody had that perspective, maybe things would be better.
You describe yourself as a nihilist.
Yeah, just like I really don't think anything matters. I think, look forward 100 billion years. Look even further forward than that. Think about the energy death of the universe. Like at some point, either everything's going to collapse back in on itself, or it's going to expand out to the point where there's the energy death, and we're going to have a point where time ceases to exist. And when that happens, there's no past either. And now this is my thinking on it. Like maybe there's an astrophysicist out there that's going like, yeah, that's totally bullshit. But
what about morality?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind
why be moral if it doesn't matter?
Because I think it matters for now. And I think you have to kind of separate those viewpoints. At least that's how I go by it, right? Like if nothing mattered and I decided like I'm just going to serve myself in this life and I'm just going to, take advantage of people, I'm going to be a con artist, whatever it is, right? Cheat on my girlfriend. I'm going to be a miserable person. My life's going to suck. So that's what I think morality is how to function in the here and now. It doesn't matter in 100 billion years if I run a red light or do something way more horrible than that. But it will matter for my life now. It could shorten my life. It could make me hated. It could make me depressed and miserable. And I want to get the best experience that I can with my time here.
We can cut it out if you don't want to talk about it. But if you do, have you had any experiences on psychedelics?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. And you're open to talking about it?
I'm way open to talking about it. I don't,
Have your experiences on psychedelics changed your
100%.
philosophies at all?
Yeah. So I love mushrooms, and we can get into that a little bit more if you want. I have medical reasons for it and also just like experiential reasons for it. But I've only done acid twice in my life. And the first time I did it, it was just like the most beautiful experience. And, everything was perfect. It made everything around me perfect. So I went back out to recreate that. And this time it said to me, nope.
Yeah.
This time you're going to learn a lesson.
Roll the dice.
And I'm going to back up for 2 sentences here. When I was 21, I thought I had a kid. It turned out it wasn't my kid. I got a DNA test after a year, like heavy circumstance that I think led to me having a horrible mistrust of women and thinking, I don't trust them, so I don't need to be very trustworthy either, right? So then I went out a couple of years later on this acid trip in Joshua Tree, and it was just like, okay, we are now going to strip down everything about you and show you piece by piece everything you're doing wrong, how it's leading to you mistreating people, how it affects them, and why your life is the way it is. At the time, I was super broke. I'd just broken up with somebody, and I just realized all these things about myself that I was holding myself back from having the life that actually would make me happy. And it changed who I am as a person, 180 degrees. So I really view that as something that I learned from, and that it was incredibly valuable for me, but I still haven't done acid again since.
Yeah. It's a doozy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Usually when people do acid, they're not like, I want to do that again. Usually they're like, whoa.
I mean, I meet people who are like, oh yeah, I do it every week.
Yeah.
That's too much, man.
You know,
mushrooms, I can control. You can give me a bad trip on mushrooms, and I'm like, oh wow, the mushrooms are giving me a bad trip.
Well, the dose on LSD is just so hard to control. You know that LSD gave way to a revolution in neuroscience because it's measured in micrograms. So the idea that something so small could have such a big impact on the mind led scientists to believe, to basically study serotonin and study neuroscience with more accuracy and curiosity.
Yeah, and this brings up something that maybe there's information out there on, but I haven't found it. But these molecules that are in DMT, mushrooms, acid, they're all really, really close to serotonin.
Serotonin, yeah. The LSD is how we found serotonin.
Right. So how is it that replacing the molecules changes our perception of reality, right? So in a sense, serotonin is giving us a perception of reality. We're tripping the real world right now.
Yeah, and LSD is just attaching to the serotonin receptor.
Yeah.
In a sense, it's giving it to you because you're experiencing reality in a totally different way. But in another sense, you have all that inside you, which is why something like breath work can be so profound, right?
Yeah.
You can induce these altered states without the chemicals. To your point, though, about some people who are just like, I'm going to trip on acid all the time. One of my favorite quotes about psychedelics is from Alan Watts. You know who Alan Watts is?
Oh, yeah.
So he was not a huge psychonaut, and someone once asked him, well, you are speaking about a lot of what these other psychedelic luminaries are speaking about, but you're not often talking about psychedelics. And he said, psychedelics, I believe, are a microscope, and you don't want to live your whole life under a microscope.
Now, my friend Cale was no Alan Watts, but he said something to me right at the beginning of my journey into psychedelics. He's like, you just have to understand, they're a window, they're not a door, right? You get to look in on that other side, but you're not walking through.
That's profound.
And I think that I learned a lot. I keep what he said in mind a lot of the time when I'm having these experiences. I'm looking at that other side. And we had a conversation earlier. I've gotten to the point where I really believe that one of the things that psychedelics is doing is they're taking down a barrier between you and your subconscious. And I'm starting to view my subconscious as almost like a separate entity inside of me. It knows a lot about me. It knows a lot, it gets to watch me from behind the doors, But to function in the conscious world, I don't think that you can be constantly communicating with your subconscious. So when people do DMT and they say, I met an entity and it was angry at me, or it was very inviting, it's odd how often that kind of relates to that person's own, inner demons, you might say. So I think that's where we have a lot of the progression, internal progression, is by breaking that barrier down a little bit and seeing ourselves from the viewpoint of a different person that's living inside of us. And for me, like I said, mushrooms have a medical reason as well. I've had cluster headaches since I was like 3 years old. I got a concussion on the back of my head when I was a kid, right in the spot where they say like 90% of people who get cluster headaches have had a concussion at this part of their head. And for some reason, they went away in my 20s. Never knew why,
Yeah.
right? And then I started getting them again in my late 20s, and I had a bout of cluster headaches that lasted for a month, every day, twice a day, completely debilitating. I lost work, I lost clients. I was trying to see a neurologist. I thought I had a brain tumor. So I was in so much pain that it made more sense to lube up my finger, stuff it up my nose into my sinuses to feel around to see if there was something in there.
Oh.
And a lot of people who get cluster headaches end up killing themselves. So finally, like, I'm talking to neurologists, and they say, no, you have to go to the ER first, and then they'll refer you. I've been to the ER in LA. You're going to sit there for 9 hours. I couldn't do that. And then finally, one of them reaches out to me and says, I didn't tell you this, but look into magic mushrooms. And I found, not a blog, a collection of people on the internet, like a Reddit thread or something, with 100,000 people that had all started using mushrooms for their cluster headaches, and there were scientific studies being done on it, and it was 98% effective at completely stopping headaches. So the next day I started to get a headache, and I thought this is either going to be the worst experience of my life or it's going to be the best. And, these headaches are incredibly intense, and I dosed myself up. And the weird thing about it was like I could feel it in there still, but the pain was gone. And then the next day, another headache started to come up. I did it again. And I did it, I think it took like 3 days of taking mushrooms, and then gone. Haven't had one since. And all I have to do is take mushrooms like once every 4 months.
That's so great. I have a friend who was on mushrooms with a buddy of his, and his buddy had never taken mushrooms in his life. Friend was colorblind. Do you know about this?
I don't know this story.
Ate mushrooms and said, that's green. That's red. That's blue. And these cases are actually common, where colorblind people will be able to see color on psychedelics.
I can't
because it's a neurological issue, right? And psychedelics are essentially dimming energy in your frontal cortex, which is kind of where your ego resides. It's where you're like, I need to do this today resides, your sense of self. All of that diminishes, and other parts of the brain that typically are not in communication will strike up conversation.
So what's that part of the brain called? I can never remember it. It's literally a filter.
Your default mode network?
Yeah. And it filters out the things that don't matter.
Yeah,
right?
That's the default mode network.
So that's why I think like we're getting to see how our subconscious sees the world.
Yeah.
If you look at Google Deep Dream and see how it works to create an image out of millions of other images, it's like it's saying, is that a face? I'm just gonna like put that pattern in so you don't have to process it anymore. There's a reason it looks like how it is to trip on mushrooms, and I think it's because our brain is constantly in the background saying, like, could be a tiger, not a tiger. That's a face over there. Is there a guy in that tree? Like, all the things that you quote unquote see on mushrooms, which I don't know about you. I don't see stuff that's not there. I just see it in a different way. I see the patterns. I see like, oh, that looks like this, but it's not this.
Yeah, and you become fascinated with a blade of grass because your brain isn't patterning the world in a way that feels familiar.
I just remembered an experience I had that really reminds me of the colorblindness thing. One of the first times I ever did mushrooms, I was out in Colorado. It was springtime. Everything was green, right? And I don't know why I even thought of this, but I was like, I wonder if I can make everything red. And I just like shifted my perception, and all of a sudden the landscape was red. Wow. And it wasn't because my brain turned green to red. It's because every blade of grass on the edge of it has a little yellow or a little red. The tree, like, you could pick the red out of the environment, and if you focused on that, all of a sudden the environment was red. And it's just, there's so much to learn here. It makes me wish that I was a neuroscientist.
It's fascinating. It really is. Probably the thing I'm most passionate about right now is becoming sort of an amateur neuroscientist, because it allows me to take everything that I'm learning and figure out how it's being processed in the brain, which I really relate to. It just takes it out of that kind of soft thinking. For example, I'm sure you've heard that MDMA can be incredibly effective to help veterans with post-traumatic stress disorder. So the reason for that is that post-traumatic stress disorder is the brain mismatching a traumatic memory with the present moment. So your hippocampus is the place where you store memory, and your amygdala is the part of your brain where you process fear. That's a very ancient part of your brain, and that's like there's a tiger. I feel that heat flush. And what happens with PTSD is that a car door will slam and that memory will be triggered, and the amygdala will also be triggered. So then you'll have this crazy fear response. And what MDMA allows soldiers to do, and this is why it's so important to do it with a therapist who can kind of guide you through those memories, is it allows the serotonin and oxytocin to be so heavy in your brain that you're basically the soldier will look at that traumatic memory through this valence of love and self-love and self-compassion. And what they've found is that after the experience on MDMA and after integration sessions, the soldiers will still remember the traumatic memory, oftentimes better than they could before, but the parts of the brain that light up are now only in the hippocampus. It's no longer in the amygdala. So it in a sense transfers that memory from the present moment into the past.
That's awesome. It's almost like our brains have built these ropes of synapses, and like, hey, this is the easiest way to figure out what that sound is. I know this happens with mushrooms too. And it allows you to kind of like break that rope down and like rearrange where the synapses connect, even if it's for a short while, but it stops just reinforcing that same pathway that goes over and over again.
Which is the importance of integration, right? Because you can have the great experience and it's the fresh powder on the mountain, and you have a chance to ski down it in a different way and form those new neurons. But that's the power of thought, and that's the power of something that seems as pedestrian as a gratitude journal is actually marking those new neural pathways for change. And then when you couple that with healthy sleep habits, which is actually where those neural pathways get grooved most deeply, you can see really profound change in the brain, which sort of like, this is something I'd love to hear your thoughts on. I know we got to finish up pretty soon, but like, there's a paradox, because in one way, humans have been the same, anatomically the same for tens of thousands of years. So we're in this, there's like this E.A. Wilson quote, which is, the problem is that we have Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technology, right? So we're running around in these ancient bodies in this modern world. So in some senses, we need to respect that ancient, just our limits as mortals. But in another sense, you can see a brain change in 3 MDMA sessions, or the plasticity involved in the way that we perceive the world, and the gap between someone who sees their life with anger and limits and someone who perceives it as an opportunity is so vast. It seems like change can happen instantly.
And look, we've all met people who've had like horribly traumatic childhoods or experiences in life, right? And some of them are like, I had these experiences, and that is going to lead me to being a fearful person, somebody who is never happy, always thinks that bad things are going to happen. And then there's people that are like, I had these horrible experiences, and I learned that this is how I want to operate, and I don't want to do this, right? And I think that a lot of that is just in how you process it. To wrap it back around a little bit, when I was advancing quickly with paragliding, I had some very scary experiences. And I know that people are using mushrooms for PTSD too. And sometimes I would just I call them mini doses. I don't believe in microdosing, honestly. But where you can feel it, it changes the way you perceive, but it's like you're not tripping balls, you know? Yeah. And I would just sit and think through and like revisualize through everything and what I should have done, or, you know, hey, guess what? That was scary, but I was actually totally fine the whole time. Like that fear came from inside, not outside. You know, I think that it's really important with all the things that we do to recognize whether we have a logical or illogical fear. Because a logical fear is great. That tells us, hey, you should get out of the way of this wave, right? And illogical fear is, and this is something I deal with a lot, I've been sitting here and it's been perfectly calm for 20 minutes. That means that the beast is out there and it's on its way. I'm actually really bad at paragliding on one site. I tend to bomb out and land long before the beginners do, because I'm sitting there going like, it has been way too calm for way too long. I need to move. I need to go somewhere.
You and I are the same person. This is way too good. Something bad's going to happen. God, the thief of enjoyment,
and I
bro.
know, and I know it's wrong, right?
Totally.
But like, you know, that's my personal struggle. And
Yeah.
I'm that way in life too. Like, oh, I've had good work for a while now.
Yeah. We got to give up the war, man. We can do it, Ben.
And like, let's face it, like, this might just be me, but, you know, when I'm telling the story, or even when I'm out flying, surfing, whatever, to me, it's going to be a better story if it was gnarly.
Yeah, of course.
Right? So there's a part of me, I think, subconscious, that's like, oh, it's gnarly.
Yeah, that's the plight. I think we got to... We'll give up the war. We're getting better at it. I know that you and I are both getting better.
The war is phasing me out a little bit. I'm almost 40, and I'm noticing major changes in just the way my brain works, in the way my body works. I just joined a gym for the first time in my life because, like, used to be the sports I did kept me in shape for the sports I did. Not anymore, you know. I have a girlfriend I love and a dog that needs me. Like, it changes. Well, should I really go out and take on this maybe make it back adventure? Probably not. Whereas 10 years ago, yeah, why not?
Yeah, well, there's something beautiful to that. Yeah. Because you're gaining greater facility over yourself and who you want to be, and you can make those decisions more slowly and consciously.
I am a very risk-averse person.
Yeah.
I deal with a lot of fear. And that's sometimes hard for me to admit, but it's true. I think I have more fear than your average person in my sports. But what I'm passionate about with all these sports is learning to control that fear and overcome it. So the way I do that, fear comes from not understanding. The more I learn about it, the more I understand it, the less fear I have. Sorry, I have smoothie stuck in my throat.
You gonna cry, bro?
Yeah, I'm gonna cry. It sounds like it.
Great place
Watch the video, because I'm not about to cry.
He's crying.
Crying's cool, though. Crying's fine.
Dude, this was so much fun.
Yeah.
You need to get on another call, but this was such a blast. This podcast made me want to try hang gliding and do mushrooms.
Yeah, well,
not
at the same time. But quick side note. I want to go tandem paragliding. I have a buddy who's pro. I want him to take me up while I'm on mushrooms and just let me feel the air from up there. I think it'd be so cool.
This is a blast, man. Where can people get in touch with you?
Yeah.
Quick way.
The easiest thing is just benhorton.biz is my website. If you can't remember that, Google Ben Horton. Yeah.
This was a blast, man. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Great to have you.